Welcome back. Up next, I'm joined by Meghan Good, VP and Director of the Cyber Accelerator at Leidos. Meghan, so pleased to meet you, and I'm glad to have a conversation with you today about cybersecurity. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Billy.
Absolutely. So, obviously, a lot going on in the federal space around cybersecurity. No need to really do a huge introduction. Everybody's heard about the EO that came out about a year ago, and some other key guidance has come out since then. But I wanted to start today with your expertise in the area and ask you, what are some of the core cybersecurity challenges that your customers are facing?
Yeah, and certainly our customers are very much responding to that executive order as we focus a lot on our federal government clients. But I think broadly in the market, there's a lot of different cyber challenges depending on your perspective, right? From a security perspective, we're looking at environments that are increasingly more heterogeneous with lots of different kinds of IT in our environments, variety of servers, of endpoints, of different tools. There's different ways that we're processing data across each of those environments for different purposes too. And I think with all of that, there's these also different users who need to access that data, have different needs for the IT. Each government agency uses it a bit differently and has a different kind of risk appetite around what they're doing with their IT from a security perspective as well. And I think all of that kind of colors this broader cyber challenge. From a technology perspective, I know all of those need to talk to each other. They need to get something done. From a security side, we want to be able to audit it. So when something happens, we can actually respond appropriately and take good action. There's, the particular protections that we want in one environment that has to be right for that risk appetite that we talked about too. So there's a lot of those, kind of balances and trade-offs that we have to make. But I think if you boil it all down, it's also a really big data challenge to secure these environments with lots and lots of complexity. From, considering another perspective, an adversarial perspective, right? There's definitely an evolving threat out there to really access all that data, to maybe modify it, to render it useless, in the cases of ransomware, and impact, the functioning of these different organizations. And adversaries are still really able to take advantage of a single or a few vulnerabilities and cause a large impact. And be able to leverage it once they're in an environment, move around, get to do the things that they want to do. And we don't quite have all of our kind of consistent security controls in place to make it so that that's not what's happening today. So I think as I look at it from a cybersecurity technologist perspective, we want to be able to limit that adversary access to these environments. We want to be able to limit the kind of movement that they can do and the kind of impact they can have in a short period of time. And I think we're all working towards really addressing that kind of challenge.
A lot of challenges. But how are you at Leidos approaching these challenges to make sure you can counter those advanced cyber threats that are emerging that you sort of just spoke to from the adversarial perspective?
Right. I think a lot of challenges, and that can sound like such a downer, right? But it's really a lot of opportunity for us, and a chance for more innovation, right? And we're certainly seeing that across the board. So for us as Leidos, it's based on our experience. Our approach is really based on decades of experience as a systems integrator for these federal and regulated commercial customers. We're also a very large security operations provider, so we're seeing a lot of these advanced threats in action. And then from the group that I lead, we're much more on the technology innovation side of taking those challenges and what's the opportunity. I see a couple of them there that really, I think, we're at the right time, the right place, and the right kind of space for this. And one is really harnessing the power of that data. As I said, it's a big data challenge across the board. So now we have so many more capabilities and technologies that we can to address the challenge of all of that data. I think over the last few years, it's been a lot about how do we put more sensors in a network to get more visibility? How do we understand what we're seeing? How do we better react to it? As better security incident and event management tools have run out, and security orchestration, automation, response tools. Those are starting to get rolled out more. Better endpoint detection with EDRs and XDRs. But there's all these different tools, and so I think it's with the data that they bring back. how can we start to evaluate against, maybe threat frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK or defend, and look at what is it that we really have visibility into and what do we not? And what are those things that we can actually expect to identify, and what are those ones that we haven't handled yet? And all of that starts to lead us to then where we're focusing from more of a threat view on what those activities are from the data that we have, and we're making the right kinds of enhancements to those tools that we've put in place. I think over time that evolution starts to then bring in, the other buzzword of the day with machine learning in there, but it really is about machine learning as we then are trying to implement other forms of artificial intelligence down the road. So with machine learning, those learning methods take time. There's a lot of variety in the data that we have, so we're actually working really hard on how to evolve those models so that we're getting to that state of better detection, better understanding of what's really happening within these environments. And so our approach is a lot about how do we kind of turn up the dial on the amount of automation, the amount of analytics, and then the amount of machine learning as well, to really help us to better respond and react in these really complex environments. But I think with that too, the last opportunity of our approach is really that everybody's at a different place. I think a lot of the spirit of the executive order is that there wasn't consistency across the different government organizations and the level of their security. So right now it's a lot about roadmaps, right? So where are you today, and what are those incremental changes that are going to make a difference, and what are those maybe huge increments, the big steps that you have to take and prioritize as well.
So going back to the executive order a little bit, obviously, I think everyone's biggest takeaway from that is this massive push to zero trust. We saw the zero trust guidance come out of it more recently at the beginning of this year. And you just mentioned a bunch of different technologies that sort of fit under this domain of cybersecurity that a lot of people are sort of excited about, but maybe don't know how they all fit together. So I'd be curious, as people push in the direction of zero trust and look to achieve that, how can they kind of conceptualize where all these technologies fit in that bigger picture?
I think that's probably the next level down challenge of the day. That's the implementation challenge, right? So great guidance from above, there's varied guidance based on the organization, if they're DoD or if they're federal executive, but how do you actually get to what's that next step that your organization is going to take with these technologies? For us, it's again kind of taking that evaluation standpoint. Where are you today, right? What configurations are you using? As an integrator, we work with a lot of different partner technology companies on what their tools are, how they fit into some of those pillars of zero trust, how they fit in with particular guidance, what sort of configurations. We very much have our own proving ground to test those out and which configurations work for particular use cases and which don't. And a lot of that is combined into what we call zero trust readiness, and our zero trust readiness levels of where are you at different points? And then what are those complementary technologies to get you to the next sort of readiness level? But I think with all of that, it's very much congealing a lot of that guidance together. It's figuring out your state where you are today, where you want to go in the future, and then what are the incremental paths to get there. I think it's the challenge of the day for all of us on that journey to zero trust, and we're really one of where we're pulling together what we've learned across lots of different customer environments so that we can apply that insight and knowledge as we're addressing an individual one as well.
So Megan, as we close out, I do want to go back to, you mentioned AI and ML, and obviously huge buzzwords, but also very exciting prospects of what those could bring. And I want to merge that with zero trust now. And what are the possibilities, or how are you incorporating AI and ML into the zero trust sort of framework or paradigm to boost that up to the next level?
Great question. And yes, I think zero trust again is our solution, I think, to that big data challenge, right? And ML is a strong component of that, and what it's going to take in the future. So for me with zero trust, it's really about, is this user allowed with this particular device on this particular network to access this particular data at this particular time? And it's a very granular decision to make. It's not one that people can make anymore. But we want to make policies and rules that will go into some of these decision points throughout an environment. And I think over time, what we've found with other security systems is that people's rules are a bit flawed and biased, right? We don't always think like that adversary, right? But I think the promise of machine learning is where we can start to use it to make that decision a bit faster. So enable that speed, help us to look at the scale across an environment where a person or an individual tool doesn't see that same scope. And then use that to provide some of that granular security. I think there's several layers probably to come, and lots of experimentation going on about what forms of machine learning really work well to deliver on those on that zero trust philosophy. But where we're seeing a lot of promise right now is about some of those local decisions and the really looking at particular ML that helps you make those more granular controls based on the kinds of sensors that you have there. And then also looking at the global decisions. So what's happening across an environment, maybe not within particular enclaves, but across the board. Are there particular shifts and changes that you need to account for? And then I think there will continue to evolve as these architectures continue to evolve with more data sources, more sensors, and different kinds of capabilities that we can use. I think it would be a really cool thing to see a recommendation engine that's powered by machine learning for, what are the next best policies you should be making? What are the responses? If you had done this, would that have helped in a particular incident? And really getting that into a much more faster, proactive, and actionable state, rather than us writing the rules into technologies today. So I think it's a field that, we talk about it as buzzwords at this point, but it is one where there's this constant evolution and growth. And from my vantage point as a technologist in this field, I can't wait to see the technology help us to really address some of those larger cyber challenges.
Well, Megan, I really appreciate your perspective on the practitioner side. So often we hear things conceptually or on the strategy side, but it's really cool to take your perspective sort of in the trenches and working this stuff out. So such a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for the chat. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.